welcome to Writing the Wrong Way, where we talk about how writing works, how writers work, and how the best writers risk being strange. And this is part 2 of my interview with Keith Cadieux. If you missed part 1, you can go check the archives, check back to last week, where you'll see part 1. And of course, the link to that is going to be in the description. And here is the second part of me talking to Keith. This is hosted by the University of Winnipeg, this discussion. And most of what I'm doing here is asking student questions, or you'll hear some students ask questions. So I really want to thank Keith, thank the students, thank the University of Winnipeg. Let's dive right into part 2 of writing horror. Denise wants to talk about Junji Ito, which Keith has, of course, read Junji Ito. Denise, did you want to hop in and ask something specific or talk about something specific, or do you just want to hear what Keith has to say about Junji Ito?
No, I just wanted to see his thoughts about Junji Ito. That's and that was just it. And what he thought about him.
He's awesome. I really like Junji Ito. Uzumaki was really excellent. That Jonathan turned me on to him, and that was the first one I read, and I really liked that story. There's something about that book where the idea, first of all, the idea itself is so bonkers. It's so odd, but then where it is really his sort of particular genius, and the way the artwork really enhances the creepiness of what's going on is the number of ways that he managed to weave spirals into it and make them scary. So for those who don't know Junji Ito or Uzumaki, this is a manga that centers around a town that is essentially haunted by spirals. People become obsessed with spirals. They turn into spirals. There are spiral things that inhabit and destroy the town, and it's really fascinating. And it's something where if you just see it on paper, it's town haunted by spirals. It's I don't get it. You have to see it. And so the artwork of it is really fantastic and very creepy. His style is so unique and very unsettling in itself. And he also has I'm not super well versed in manga, so I don't know how common it is to have short manga collection, essentially a short story collection that is in this form. But his shorter stories, his shorter little bits. So there's a collection called Shiver, which has a number of really just shorter comic book length stories, and those are all really fascinating too. And he has just really great ideas that really stick with you, and they're all very weird and bizarre. So there's the one where people turn into giant balloons that haunt the town, and again, that shouldn't work on page. When you just hear it, it doesn't sound very scary, but the actual story of it really is. There's one with a model that is they all think is really ugly, but they get obsessed with this particular model and track her down and try to put her in a movie. And that one's really fascinating too. So yeah, I am definitely a big fan of Junji Ito. He's great. Everyone should look up his stuff.
Also, Denise, if you don't already know his work, you should check out Hideshi Hino, who is one of the big influences on Junji Ito. Hideshi Hino. Just a bunch of questions just kind of related to your really craft specific, but let me just first kind of maybe run through a couple of the ones related to kind of the state of horror, in your opinion. When you look at the horror, Raina's wondering, when you look at horror that's come out recently, do you think it's stayed, true to the genre for the most part, or do you think there's been a lot of innovation or repetitiveness? Where do you kind of feel the state of horror is these days, in a sense, is the question.
I think there's a little bit of both. I think there's definitely a lot of repetitiveness. I guess should we deal with like horror fiction or horror film? And so like they are sort of, they feed into each other in interesting ways. So horror film is, there's still definitely innovation out there, but now that there's been these grand successes, now the copycats are coming about. And so there's a lot of repetitiveness in horror film at the moment. But there is still innovation happening in there.
Just connected
Which
that,
is,
Sandy wants to talk about Jordan Peele. I don't know if you want to dive in there, Sandy, as well, to kind of throw in on horror film and Jordan.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you watched John Peele's both the movies and just as yeah, like what do you think about his writing? And I just want to add this while I have the chance. Have you ever thought of getting into script writing or screenwriting with your background?
yeah, I definitely would. I would jump at the chance to do screenwriting. I don't have very much experience in it. I did write for a true crime show very, very briefly. I wrote a script for like this very, very low budget, just like true crime, like video magazine type show, like a cheap version of 60 Minutes kind of thing. So I've got one script under my belt, and it pays really well to screenwrite. So yeah, I would absolutely jump at the chance to do it, but I haven't done it as of yet, so I'm still quite inexperienced, and I haven't quite stumbled on an idea that would only work as a movie. I think that's going to be where I really fall into just jumping the gun and doing it. Will be like, I'll have an idea and I can't make it work as a book. I'll have to make a script. Hasn't happened yet, but I hope, like, that would be great. I would love to. Jordan, I have absolutely seen Get Out and Us. I really like both of them. I'm also a really big fan of Key and Peele. And I think if you, especially after watching his horror movies, if you go back and watch Key and Peele, there is this undertone of a lot of the same horror themes that he wants to deal with that is embedded in a lot of these sketches, especially where they really poke fun at racism and police. Like, you can definitely see the bones of Get Out in a couple of their older sketches. Of the two, I like Get Out the most. I really think that one is just really, really fascinating, and it's not an idea I've had myself, but I've read quite a lot about it because I really like it. That's when you like something, you tend to absorb as much about it as you can. And something that I think holds true that I've read about it a lot is that it's one of the only horror movies that centers a Black character's experience rather than imagining a Black character's experience through the white lens. It's certainly not the first movie that's dealt with Black characters, but it tends to be made for a white audience. And so there's this work done to make sure that a white viewer understands the plight, or like there's this little bit of like, okay, now you're going to imagine what it's like to be Black and what racism really is. And Get Out didn't really do that, and it just puts you in this space with Daniel Kaluuya's character, where there's no hand holding. You're just expected to identify with his experience and what's happening. And it worked. Like, it didn't need to bring anybody up to speed. Like, the story just functions on its own. And there's these really great subtle digs all the way through it where like he kills the one character with the buck head, like the stag head, and where Black men were often called bucks. And when he's tied to the chair, he picks the cotton out of it. It really, really rewards watching it very, very closely. And I love that about it. I think that's really fascinating. And yeah, the central metaphor of old white people inhabiting Black bodies to continue to survive is this fantastic. Like, most horror stories have this metaphorical connection somewhere in there, and Get Out's is just really strong and really vivid. yeah, I love that movie, and it's also very funny, which helps break the tension because it's really heady. Like it's very heavy stuff, but you're able to get through it because it's also weirdly hilarious.
Kind of tied to this is Tanner's question about what do you think about the Lovecraftian monsters in modern TV movies and games, and this probably links back a little bit to Raina's question about what do you think the state of horror is sort of at the moment.
Yeah, definitely a Lovecraft fan, and yeah, I'm not sure when I guess I was pretty young when I first read Cthulhu. The Call of Cthulhu was the first Lovecraft story I tried, and I had gotten to Lovecraft by way of Stephen King, who mentions them a lot, and Metallica, which has their song Call of Cthulhu, where they spell it wrong for some unknown reason. But that was like, because I had heard of him through other avenues, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to go back and look at what this Lovecraft guy is. And I still really like his monsters. And I think his take on the monsters is still the best. That what we're seeing is people who also really enjoy the mythos and want to expand it or want to like pull Cthulhu into other situations or something like that. And I still think the Call of Cthulhu is the best story with Cthulhu in it. And he's sort of not in it really, but I think, yeah, there's definitely interesting stuff in there. At the Mountains of Madness is still really interesting too. And that's sort of an interesting intertextual thing because now there's lots of writers writing into the Cthulhu, into Lovecraft mythos. But At the Mountains of Madness delves in, is borrowing a universe from Edgar Allan Poe that the creatures, that there's this particular sound that they say, and that's taken directly from the manuscript found in a bottle, or I can't remember if that's the exact title, but it's a Poe story. He's dealing with a Poe story right off. So I think that's interesting that he started out by working with someone else's creation, and now we're seeing the same thing with Lovecraft. That his biggest endurance is that people are using those ideas and the bevy of monsters, or even just like the way he approaches certain tropes of horror. Like a lot of his go-tos have become horror tropes. So like the narrator who goes mad and cults and everything like that. That's really been turned into like a full-on mainstream cliche. But we're getting interested. Like I like that we're sort of beyond copycatting at this point, and there are people who are expanding and going different places with Lovecraftian ideas. And so one who I really like, and this would be like sort of another like alongside similar boxes that Jordan Peele checks, is Victor Laval, who's a horror writer, and he had a novella come out called The Ballad of Black Tom, which is a rewriting of The Haunting of Red Hook, which is a Lovecraft story, and Lovecraft Country also, which is a show that was a novel first, but it's sort of overtly trying to deal with the fact that Lovecraft is really, really racist, and sort of using racism as one of Lovecraft's biggest monsters. So The Ballad of Black Tom and Lovecraft Country sort of both deal with going into white dominated areas where there is some sort of cult influence or some sort of dark influence in there, and it's very, very dangerous. But it is like it's a full-on monster cult, but it's all like the white sheriffs and the corrupt police departments and everything are all part of these cults. So that's something where Lovecraft is sort of being expanded on. And like I say, I do love Cthulhu. I think he's a little too like ever present. He's not scary anymore. You can get plush Cthulhu.
South Park, yeah.
Yeah. And so like the familiarity has taken the scariness away, and like what made Lovecraft stand out was that there was not really anything else like that when his stories came out. Like no one else was kind of really delving into that kind of dark imagination of like that kind of creature or of entity, and now people have. And so we like, the need is to push beyond, because we get the idea of the big underwater monster, like it doesn't really unsettle us anymore. But like again, another idea where someone has expanded that kind of idea is the game Bloodborne, which is very, very Lovecraftian. And if there are any gamers here and you guys haven't played it, you gotta try Bloodborne, because that is like, it's a hugely Lovecraftian story, but also sort of solves Lovecraft's biggest MacGuffin, or like that he often writes. They're almost all first-person stories, Lovecraft's stories. So the narrator is telling what happened, but the whole point of the story is that the narrator went insane, or the knowledge is so forbidden that no one should have it. But he wrote it down, and here it is. So there's like this central conflict that doesn't make sense. And like that sort of saps the fun out of the whole story. But Bloodborne fixes that problem, because you as the player, you have to put it together. And it's really hard to piece together the background story of like what is actually going on in this town. And so you don't have to, you can just play the bosses. It's really gory. It, like, looks really neat. You can just plow through it and not have any idea what's going on. But if you really dig and pay attention, and like there's a lot of environmental storytelling of like when you go into certain buildings, like do you understand what this building is? And when you look around, and like you can piece together what has happened. And so like the story within Bloodborne is really fascinating, and it's essentially about a Lovecraftian monster and two different cult factions that have veered off. And one is obsessed with the blood of the monster, and the other side is obsessed with the science of it and discovering from like where in space is it from. And so like it's a church and a college, and they have devolved into like these crazy extremes. But getting to that, like figuring out that that's the actual premise of the story is quite difficult, and it means the player has to do that big deep dive, rather than have somebody sit you down and being like, I shouldn't share this with you, but here's all the information. So I think that's a really fascinating way to delve into a story like that.
Let's get into a couple of writing specific or craft questions. So like Lillian asked, what advice would you give to someone who wants to write about horror for the first time? Just a broad question there, but a broad kind of craft question about how to approach horror as a writer for the first time.
Yeah, it just in terms, like very, very basically, I would sort of wonder, like, if it's like a particular idea that you think is horror, and you're going to explore it as a horror idea, my first thing would be to like examine why you think it's scary. And I think that's where you'll break out a story out of it, is like, why in particular is this idea scary? And then that's where you'll get your imagery and your themes, where you'll get your character conflict, is like, what is scary about this particular thing? Because that's what you should be emphasizing in terms of like where you're taking your story, where you're making it into art. Like they should be connected. If you're really worried about, like, if you use the wrong monster, then it won't really work, right? Like you can't use a vampire when it's the leg is like a ghost, or I don't know. I'm not coming up with a good example. But if you use the wrong monster, it won't work. So if you got a particular idea in mind, I would say like the first thing to really delve into is why is that particular idea scary? And that's where your story is going to come from. In terms of wanting to just like, you don't have a particular story, you want to do horror, like that would be similar. Like what itch are you trying to scratch by going into like using a horror mode. And so even if you don't have a particular idea in mind, you must feel like you want to tell a scary story. Like there's that desire, and so like examining, well, why is that where you want to go? And these, like, you won't necessarily come up with like, oh, here's my paragraph, but it's something to examine in terms of like, why are you having that feeling, and what is going to satisfy that desire. And again, that's probably where your story is going to come from, is when you're diving and thinking big about big ideas like that. We tend to, you'll come up with something smaller that sort of exemplifies what you're feeling in terms of like a larger core idea. Like, why do you want to tell a horror story?
Bryce is wondering if you ever had a really bad creative writer's block, and if so, how you overcame it.
I'm sort of in the middle of one right now. That the pandemic has ruined my productivity. That I find it's been very stressful, and so something Jonathan knows, but I have an existing lung disease, so I'm very, very high risk. So I have essentially been under house arrest since March 2020. I've taken the dog for a walk. I have made like 2 or 3 ventures into a store, but I've mostly been home for a very long time. And before the pandemic, I was like, God, I just want to sit at home. Like, why do I have to keep going to work and doing all these stupid things? And then I got it, and it blew up in my face. It's ruined it. But that's something where I find that sort of stress has really given me a writer's block. It's getting better. It is getting better now. I'm sort of coming out of it by being more aware of like what about the situation is stressful to me. So I try to structure my day a little bit more carefully. So like when I wake up, I sit and read. Read quietly. It's nice enough to like do that outside, which is kind of nice. I take my dog for walks to like get up and go be somewhere else. So yeah, I'm trying to. I had like a goal of like I was going to watch something scary or something that I find inspirational every day. So I would watch a scary movie, or I'd restart shows that I really like. So I've rewatched Hannibal, which I really liked, True Detective, all these other things that like the ideas in there sort of get me thinking. I was like, I want to write something like this, and so I've been trying to gravitate to stuff like that lately to try to get back into a space where I want to be creative, and it's working. It's sort of baby steps. So I'm definitely coming out of a writer's block area. The best advice I could give for that really is to, if you find yourself in a spot where it's just not working, is what's actually been helpful to me is to just give yourself a break. You just be like, you know what, it's not going to happen right now. Because sometimes the stress of feeling like you're wasting time or feeling unaccomplished is just making it worse, and it's just piling on what's blocking your creativity. So like I found, like especially at the start of the pandemic, where I was really putting pressure on myself to be productive, that I found myself like I wouldn't even go near my computer. Like I was just, the idea of sitting down in front of it made me anxious. So I needed to sort of just be like, you know what, it's not there right now, and expecting myself to just snap out of it is making it worse. So I'm gonna let myself have a fallow period, right? Of just, I'm not going to produce right now. And so now I'm sort of on the other end of that, where the desire to be productive is coming back rather than the anxiousness of not being productive.
The writing teacher in me
forcing it is no good. So
the writing teacher in me will agree with that, but also give kind of alternate advice. Whereas forcing it is no good, I really recommend when people have writer's block that they maintain a writing schedule, but just retype horror authors they like. So you sit down, you perform the activity of writing, and you kind of stay in practice in a sense, but you eliminate the need to produce anything of your own. But instead just go through the motions of retyping, say Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. I find that really helps people, because often what they get into with the writer's block is they start to pile on top of their problem the idea that they must remove their problem. And as you say, it becomes an increasingly anxious situation to sit down at the desk or whatever. However, fundamentally, you can't solve the problem without sitting down at the desk. So I find is that it becomes a bigger and bigger hurdle to get back in front of the computer in a writing sense. And if you just instead remove like kind of, in a sense, mentally walk away from the desk, but actually stay there. And so you don't have to actually write anything, but you have to retype, something you enjoy. I find that tends to get people very quickly, relatively speaking, into a space where they just, leave off doing that and type their own idea. They come up with something they want to write instead of retyping Shirley Jackson much faster. So, I kind of agree with what you're saying, but I would sort of suggest people maybe try to focus on the mental side of it while keeping the kind of physical activity of staying on the desk intact. At least as a sort of, I've seen that work with people sometimes faster is all. But it's the same thing. It's just it has a different quality in some respects.
Actually, yeah, I do like that, because then you keep the muscle memory of it, which also becomes important.
Kind of connected in here just with craft is like Ramanpreet wants to know, after writing a story, who do you ask to read it first, or do you just read it yourself first? And how do you get to the point kind of where it's a story that can be published? Like, so sort of a question about the editing and feedback process in a sense.
Yeah. So I tend to want someone else to look at, like, if I get a draft all the way through to the end, I'll tend to want somebody else to take a look at it before I really want to do another big edit or a big pass over it. So I'll tend to like spit it out. And then I do have a writers group that I meet with regularly. So I'll give it to them and just, I'll have the caveat of like, this is garbage. I just spat it out its first draft, but tell me what works. Yeah, so I do have other readers. I have other, so my writers group too is not, the other writers are not necessarily horror focused. So that's sort of a good lens in terms of, does it work for a non-horror audience? So like that's sort of my goal too, is my first people who like, I would really like just people who like horror to like it. But it would be nice if people who don't like horror also get something out of it too. It still sort of functions if that's not your wheelhouse. But then again, I do have beta readers who are like the hardcore horror junkies. So it definitely goes to them as well to take a look at it. So finding people whose opinions you trust is good. So like I said, I got like two different lenses of like straight up, like just straight literary audience, horror focused audience. There are people who I know they're writing, so I know they're good. But also their ability to give advice. I trust their advice if they're finding something that doesn't work, or that doesn't work, like that they don't like, things they do like. Yeah, and that's just something that sort of comes with time. Like I've had multiple writers groups, and this is the one that has lasted the longest. With this core group has stayed together for a long time, whereas other times there's been like larger groups and people sort of hive off or disappear over time. This is like multiple years going, so that's just sort of been whittled down. So it's a good group. I'm going to keep it. But then also like with workshopping and giving, taking advice from other people is knowing what advice not to take. So like that is again just a learned skill that sometimes the feedback I get doesn't jive with what I know about the story or what I want the story to do. So that comes from just a little bit of, self-confidence and a little bit of self-centered conceitedness, that where like you do, if you're a writer, you do have to have that little bit of like, no, I'm right, you listen. So it's like, it's good to listen to everybody else, but there is a sense where you have to have the confidence that what you're telling is worth telling.
Roman Preet is also sort of along these lines, asking what how you kind of prepare for feedback, particularly like whether it's negative or positive feedback, and how do you like take that feedback and use it?
That it tends to be with, does the feedback get me closer to my ideal of what I want the story to be, or does it get further away? So if I'm trying to, like, let's just imagine like I'm trying to instill a particular dread, or I want people to walk away, like this scene has to be a button cap on whatever, like this is where like the big scare happens or something. If the feedback I get actually works, like you should be able to tell fairly easily, especially if you know what you're trying to do with your story. You'll be able to look at feedback like that and say, yes, that's better. That will get me closer to my goal. And if it doesn't get you closer to your goal, then that's the kind of, like you can still look at that feedback and like there still might be something to it, but what you're working towards is your goal for the story. And so you sort of take the advice that gets you closer to that. And if it's not getting you closer to that, then it's not necessarily the right advice for what you're doing. And so like that's where it becomes difficult too, and where you have like trusting your beta readers, in that if your beta readers are likely other writers, if they're not great, and if you have readers who are just such good fine-tuned readers that they can pick stuff out, then use those, because that's still like a really good audience. But usually the advice you get from beta readers is because they are also writers, they're also storytellers, so they've got their own tips and tricks, and like they've solved their own narrative problems, so they may have a way out of something you've built for yourself. But the whole point of your story is that you are the one telling your story, and if you gave them the exact same idea, their story would be different. And sometimes you can get good practical stuff out of that and make your story better. But if the advice is taking you away from what you want your story to be, then you don't have to use it, right? Like the whole thing is like, is it making your story and your vision for your story, is it getting better? And that's how you weigh which advice to take and which to leave aside.
Let's rapid fire through the last kind of 7 questions here before I let you go, Keith. From Anna Lua, is how long roughly does it take from like the idea to finished story for you?
Varies a lot. So I've had stories that have taken years to finish, that I haven't been like aggressively working on them for years at a time, but I'll tend to leave them alone for a while and come back. But they may take, like, I think the longest one. So like, well, and then there's like from finished to printed is different. It's like Signal Decay, first draft of that was probably 5 years ago. And it just came out. So, but I've had other ones where I have gone from like the initial idea to finishing it within a week. So it really varies on what the idea is, and like some of them just feel more intense and feel more like current. Like I've got to get it out now because it's so specific to whatever has happened, right? And then
Sure.
Once you're out of that moment, you're sort of, your chance to improve that story is gone. So I do have finished stories that I have spat out very, very fast, and that even if I go to look at them now and like, do they need an edit? Like I don't really I don't change very much. And so that's sort of like, I saw in the chat there was a question of like, when do I know that I'm done?
Mm-hmm.
That would be like when I get to the point in the story where I'm just sort of nitpicking dumb stuff, where I'm like, I'm moving this comma over there, and I am slightly altering this sentence, but it means the same thing. I'm just changing them. So I'm just fussing with things that aren't actually making any big changes. I'm not refining the story. I'm not cutting anything big out. I'm not settling on images or metaphors anymore. It's just tinkering around. That's when I'm like, okay, like I have like
Sure.
I'm at the point now where like the more I play with it, the worse it's going to get.
Okay, well, let's just lightning round a couple things here. To who are your favorite characters in horror stories from Keith?
Yeah, that sort of, I think, depends on the story. I especially like even from when I was a little kid, I liked villains more than heroes. So big into like Shredder and Venom. Um, so like something like that would be in the Hannibal Lecter books. Definitely, Hannibal Lecter is the most interesting character in all of those books. And then they made a whole show over about him. But there are different stories too, like where like The Haunting of Hill House, where the main character is not a villain, but she is the most. So yeah, it depends on, very much depends on the story. So
Who's the greatest author of horror stories in your opinion?
I guess like the one I've sort of said is my favorite author for like the longest is Shirley Jackson. She's lasted the longest and risen to the top of the pile the most. So like that sort of change. Like I think everybody has your favorite author might fluctuate. It might change here and there, but she's on average at the top the most. So
Sure. Analu also was wondering, has there ever been a time in your writing career, when you felt like you wanted to quit?
so like I was saying, I am sort of in a writer's block period now, so I haven't been productive, which has certainly been frustrating. And especially if you like a big part of your identity, if you tell people you're a writer and you're not writing, well, that's no fun. So so I've sort of been in the midst of that where I have felt like I've sort of temporarily quit, but I still want to go back to it. Like I've always sort of had the desire, like, even if I'm not doing it right now, I always have it in my head that I will get back to that. Like I won't stop completely. I've never been like, I don't want to do this anymore ever. But I have certainly had times where like, I can't do this right now. I don't want to. And it's something too, where in terms of like, it's really not paying all my bills. So it's not my full-time job. So it's always been sort of an on the side thing. So in terms of like, it's not like quitting a job because it's never been my job. So I think that is like a little bit of a different impulse. It's sort of always been, it's like having a homework for your entire life. You just, it's always there. Like I've always sort of wanted to get back to it, even when I'm not producing at the time. So this is like probably the longest where I haven't really done anything, where it's been like over a year that I haven't been producing, but always in there somewhere is I want to get back to it at some point.
But even in there, you published a book too, right? So, there is like sort of the way in which you're still engaged in it in that respect, even if you're
there's that.
doing
So
a lot of writing on day to day.
But something was still happening.
Rajlan is asking just sort of, an interesting question of like, what unsolved murder fascinates you the most?
So, there's a lot. Actually, one I only just discovered recently. So I'm also a big podcast listener. So, true crime podcasts, Stuff You Should Know is really good if no one's ever listened to that. And surprisingly, Stuff You Should Know has really good murder ones every now and then. Like they also have ones like How the Muppets Work. And then the one I just listened to was the Cleveland Torso Murders, which was really fascinating. And there's a serial killer in the 30s, like during the Great Depression in one of the Chicago slums, that they just kept pulling all these torsos out of the river there. It was never really solved, and there's a graphic novel on it called Torso, and it was apparently going to be David Fincher's next movie after Zodiac, but it all fell apart. which leads me into another great unsolved murder, because the Zodiac one is really interesting too. So the torso murders is like a new one that I've just discovered, which is really interesting. The Zodiac killer is really interesting, and the film Zodiac is really, really good. If no one's seen that, and that's one that's like horror adjacent. It's like it's fully realistic, like it's a realist movie, but it does have this sort of unsettling feeling to it. Like it feels like a horror movie, and like because of the mystery of never being able to get at who the Zodiac is, like that is just it's a really well done, dread inducing movie. The Velisca axe murders are real. That's a good like deep dive for, and lots of podcasts about that. That Russian one, oh no, I can't remember the name of it. The Dyatlov Pass incident, that one's really cool. That's not really a murder though. That's just a really weird unsolved happening. But I have a lot of those too. That's a long list we could dive down.
Navdeep is wondering if you still remember your first story that you wrote, and just sort of some of the big differences you see in like what you did and how you managed to improve. So that's a big question, but maybe you can give the short kind of version of that.
So yeah, my first real attempt was a ripoff of Spawn, and I used to want to do comic books too. So I had like a lot of comic book ripoff ideas, and so I guess like that was where I noticed a big change. Was when I stopped just ripping off stuff I liked, and was actually coming up with something that I thought I don't think I've seen exactly this before. Whereas like when I was first starting out, I was really just regurgitating things that I really liked, and not adding to them either. Like it was the same idea, and that was I think from doing like creative writing classes was the biggest leap for me, and that was actually like getting to workshop with other people who are working on stuff. And yeah, that was where I noticed the biggest difference, was when I actually started sharing with other writers and going back and forth with that feedback. Was really helpful, because even solving other people's story problems will help you solve your story problems. And so that's also been usually the biggest thing that gets me out of like getting back into productivity, is looking at other people's stuff and helping them sort of break their own stories. And like that's always, I find, very helpful to me. And then it sort of gives, a positive enough feeling to go back and solve those problems yourself.
Octavian is wondering if you think there's a kind of best format for horror stories. Like Poe said the short story was the best format. Do you think it's, film, novels, short stories, or are you kind of agnostic on the question of which is the best, or do you think one of them does stand above the others?
I think that's, again, like it depends on the particular story. Like there are some that work best as one format, and like so that is sort of a case-by-case basis. There are certainly formats that do work better. So you'll definitely see more excellent examples in one form, but there will still be ones in other like less likely forms that still manage to do it. But in terms of perhaps like the most effective, I think is the short story, and probably the first person short story is the most basically effective for a horror story. And that's why there's just so many. And it's not necessarily that they're derivative, it works really well. Like, it's like the same way like a cliche is a cliche for a reason. It functions, like it does work. So a first person short story is usually like the basic formula, like that will probably work. But there are certainly stories that pull off, like, and then it, like Poe's thing with the short story, but the whole thing being one sitting. And so in terms of like a payoff of dread, then yeah, like the one sitting thing holds pretty true. So and that's why like a movie works really well also. That is essentially the same thing. It's a single sitting, you get all the way through it, and it works really, really well. But there are ways to use like the longer structure or the way other formats might break up the story in order to enhance it. So like we talked about House of Leaves, where part of the tension comes from how physically difficult it is to deal with that book. And that plays into the tension that the story is giving you. A particular show that is like 10 episodes long can make really effective use of where they break that story apart, so that when you come back to it with this known knowledge, it rams more tension into a smaller space. But you need those other episodes. But it's the break in the story that allows you to absorb everything that's happening. And so like there's examples for everything. Like any format can work depending on what the story is and what best enhances the scary part of the story. But in terms of like, if you want like the one that is the easiest, first person short story is probably the easiest place to start.
That answers Chance's kind of question, which was, what type of narration do you think works the best in the horror story? So just last question, quick from Chance also is, what'd you think of Bird Box?
Didn't like Bird Box.
Yeah.
I read the book. I haven't seen the movie. I didn't like the book. But I do think the concept works better as a book than a movie. And like I said, I haven't seen the movie, but because they're blindfolded half the damn time, I don't see how that works as a movie. But I haven't seen it, so I shouldn't dump on it because I don't understand it. But in terms of the book, I wasn't a huge fan.
Thanks so much for talking to us, Keith. And and I do recommend everybody go check out this new book, Signal Decay. It's very small.
Thanks so much, everyone.
It's fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Great questions.
Thanks, Keith.
And see you later.